My first day as a night janitor at the old hospital was supposed to be a straightforward, albeit eerie, experience. The building, abandoned for years, had a reputation for being haunted, but I didn't believe in ghosts. The job was just a paycheck. I arrived at dusk, the sun casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. The hospital loomed in front of me, a monolithic structure of decaying brick and shattered windows. The manager handed me a flashlight, a set of keys, and a map of the building. "Stick to the main corridors and don't wander off," he advised. His tone was stern, almost warning. As I began my rounds, the silence was deafening. My footsteps echoed down the empty halls, and the beam of my flashlight danced across peeling paint and faded signage. The first few hours passed uneventfully, but then I reached the third floor. A cold breeze, seemingly from nowhere, swept past me, sending chills down my spine. I shrugged it off and continued my work. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from a nearby room. Heart pounding, I approached cautiously. The door creaked open to reveal an overturned metal bed and scattered medical equipment. I convinced myself it was the wind, despite the lack of open windows. As I moved to leave, I heard a faint whisper, like someone calling my name. I froze, straining to listen. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. I turned, shining my flashlight around the room, but saw nothing. My rational mind fought to maintain control, but fear was creeping in. I continued my rounds, increasingly anxious. In the basement, I came across an old operating theater. The room was eerily preserved, as if abandoned in the middle of a procedure. Instruments lay on a rusty tray, and a gurney stood in the center. As I approached, my flashlight flickered and died. Plunged into darkness, I fumbled for my spare flashlight. In the brief moments of darkness, I heard soft footsteps behind me. When the new flashlight flickered on, the room was empty. I was alone, or so I thought. Then, the whispering began again, louder and clearer. "Get out," it hissed. Panicking, I hurried back to the main corridor. The whispers followed, growing into a cacophony of voices. Desperate to escape, I ran to the exit. As I fumbled with the keys, the voices crescendoed, a deafening roar of anger and despair. Finally, I burst through the door, collapsing onto the pavement outside. I never returned to that hospital. The manager called, asking why I left, but I couldn't explain. I didn't believe in ghosts, but whatever was in that hospital was real. I quit that job the next day, leaving the haunted past behind. Even now, years later, I can still hear those whispers in my nightmares. My first day at the old shipping warehouse seemed simple enough. The job involved night shifts, organizing and cataloging shipments. The pay was decent, and I needed the money, so I didn't mind the odd hours. The warehouse was massive, a labyrinth of towering shelves and shadowy corners. The manager, a grizzled man named Pete, gave me a quick tour and left me to my work. "Just make sure everything's in order for the morning crew," he said. His parting words were cryptic, "Watch out for the shadows." I started by inventorying the boxes near the entrance. The task was monotonous but straightforward. As the hours ticked by, the quiet of the warehouse began to feel oppressive. I could hear every creak, every rustle. It was unsettling, but I attributed it to the age of the building. Around midnight, I ventured deeper into the warehouse. The overhead lights cast long, eerie shadows, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. I was in one of the farthest aisles when I first heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. I paused, listening. It stopped, and I shook my head, convincing myself it was just the building settling. But the tapping resumed, closer this time. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but saw nothing. The shadows seemed to shift, dancing at the edge of my vision. I pressed on, my nerves fraying. Then, the lights flickered, plunging the aisle into darkness for a brief, heart-stopping moment. When they came back on, I saw a figure at the end of the aisle. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was dressed in outdated, tattered work clothes, and his eyes were hollow, empty pits. He stood motionless, staring at me. My heart raced, but I managed to muster the courage to call out. "Hey, you can't be here. This area is off limits." The figure didn't respond. Instead, he started to walk towards me, his movements jerky and unnatural. Fear gripped me, and I backed away, keeping my flashlight trained on him. The figure dissolved into the shadows, vanishing as suddenly as he had appeared. I was alone again, but the sense of being watched remained. I hurried through my tasks, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The tapping resumed intermittently, always closer, always just out of sight. I felt trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. As my shift neared its end, I returned to the entrance to complete my log. Pete arrived early, noticing my pale, shaken state. "You saw him, didn't you?" he asked, almost sympathetically. "Who?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Old Joe," Pete replied. "Used to work here years ago. Died in an accident. Some say he never left." I quit on the spot, refusing to spend another minute in that haunted place. The warehouse still stands, and Old Joe remains, a spectral guardian of the shadows. I moved on, but the memory of that night lingers, a chilling reminder of the unknown. It was my first day at the new job, a marketing firm located in a sleek, modern office building downtown. The building had only recently opened, and our company was one of the first tenants. My excitement was palpable as I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, ready to start this new chapter of my career. The office was bright and airy, with large windows offering stunning views of the city. My new colleagues were welcoming, and the day flew by in a whirlwind of introductions and onboarding activities. As the clock neared 6 p.m., most of the staff began to trickle out. I decided to stay late to catch up on some paperwork. By 8 p.m., the office was deserted. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system. I was engrossed in my work when I heard a faint noise, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It seemed to be coming from the conference room down the hall. I ignored it at first, but the tapping persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Curiosity got the better of me, and I went to investigate. The conference room was dark, but the door was ajar. I pushed it open, and the tapping stopped. The room was empty. I stood there for a moment, puzzled, before heading back to my desk. As I sat down, my computer screen flickered, displaying an error message. The lights in the office flickered too, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, I felt a cold draft, as if someone had opened a window, but all the windows were sealed shut. The tapping resumed, louder than before, and this time it was accompanied by a whispering sound. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent chills down my spine. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I followed the sound. It led me to the storage room at the end of the hallway. As I opened the door, the whispering stopped abruptly. Inside, the room was pitch black, but I could feel a presence, an overwhelming sense of dread. I fumbled for the light switch, and when the light flickered on, I gasped. In the middle of the room stood a tall figure, its face obscured by shadow. It was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, a stark contrast to the modern surroundings. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and piercing. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving me alone in the room. Terrified, I ran back to my desk, grabbed my things, and left the office as fast as I could. As I rode the elevator down, the whispering followed me, growing louder and more frantic. I could hardly breathe by the time I reached the lobby. The next morning, I told my manager what had happened. She looked at me with a mix of sympathy and concern. "You're not the first to experience this," she said quietly. This building was constructed on the site of an old hotel, one with a dark history. Some say the spirits of those who died there still linger. I didn't last long at that job. The fear of encountering that figure again was too much. I moved on, but I can never forget the feeling of being watched, the cold draft, and the whispering. The office building still stands, a modern facade hiding a sinister past.